Hey Venu, can you hear me? Am I audible? Sanket, Arif.
Hey, Raghuveer, I can hear you loud and clear.
Yes.
All right. Hi Venu. You're on mute.
Okay. Now?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. Clear? That's fine. Hi.
So, what would you require? So you presenting? Do you need any breakout rooms or?
No, I just have a presentation that I have.
Okay.
I've created the presentation. So basically, I think the first 1 hour that I'm looking at, I'm going to talk about the brand stories that I think will feature. And the second hour, I want to take about 10 minutes with 6 of the people who responded, the companies who responded. And then do a 10-minute session where we look at identifying customers and how do you sharpen that.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
All right. So we'll give another 5 minutes or so for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm fine. Yeah. So presentation, I already have access to.
Yeah, you will have the co-hosting rights. Just a second. Yeah, you have the co-hosting rights, so you will be able to share your screen.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, and if you need anybody to ask questions in the middle of the session, then people can unmute themselves and ask the question. So they have the features in it.
Absolutely. Done. Is there anything else that you want me to keep in mind or?
Nothing. I'll give you a quick intro and then it's over to you.
Okay. So it's all mine. Fine. Okay. Sounds good then. So here I'm just sharing. Okay, share screen. I can see the. Yeah, I've got hosting right, so I can see the share screen out here now. Yeah. So I think that's fine to a large extent. That would be the. Yeah, that should be fine.
Yeah.
Have you had sessions on branding before?
We did, but we want to make it a much more comprehensive and exclusive kind of session for Lab 32.
Okay.
Yeah, and make it more of a case-oriented kind of approach to branding.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Good. So it'll be, and I was going through some of the startups and some of the sites that have already been up. So it's an interesting mix of entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Let's see what they think and what they have to say, because obviously they are literally having to do this on a daily basis. So
correct.
Okay. So I've seen Kashyap and Ayush also on the mail trail, right? They are.
Yeah. So they're part of the Lab 32 team.
Okay.
They're my colleagues. This is
Hi, Ayush.
Hi.
And Kashyap.
And
Okay.
Kashyap.
So, hey Kashyap. So, what do you guys look after? What are the things that you do?
So while Raghu leads
you're on mute. Yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
While Raghu leads the Lab 32 program here, I manage it, and Kashyap is there. He helps us with the program coordination overall. So we are one team. We work with all the startups and we work towards Mr.
Okay. I think Lab 32 is among the most active incubators, right? I've seen lots of.
Yeah, so we are doing our 6th cohort. This is our 6th cohort.
Okay.
And,
okay.
One of the established.
So you must be getting a lot of interest from entrepreneurs who Initially, it starts as a small trickle, then it becomes a flood. Then there's a whole lot
Right.
more work to be done to try and figure out, okay, which one of these actually work.
Yeah, but now there's a lot of competition. People have started commoditizing the acceleration and incubation. So even the VC firms have got into the business. So it is tough for us.
Yeah. I think Y Combinator was among the
That is a top.
early ones which kind of used this model. They went away from the VC thing and then said, okay, we'll actually try and see how you can develop.
Correct.
But I think even that, and they have quite a few success stories. I suppose that's the whole point. Once you get the cycle moving, then a whole lot of other things happen. Which,
Yeah. Founder success is our success. So
yeah, that's really the.
VC
So what about
incubators
the earlier? Sorry, Ayush, you're on mute.
I'm saying VC incubators are mostly unidirectional. They are focused on money matters. However, incubation in general means that product excellence, product market
Right.
reachability, market
Right.
availability, and overall, readiness for market, right?
Right.
So that is what the target is. VCs, they're commercializing that.
And readiness for exit as well. Once a couple of years or 3-4 years down the line.
yeah, their plan is now the investment game also has become very competitive. And they felt that if they get into platform management or incubation and acceleration, they can nurture these startups at an early stage,
Right.
then they lead them towards investment. So that's the whole plan.
Okay.
All right. So you want to kick it off, Venu? People be joining in, or do you want to give them a few more minutes, a minute or two?
Up to you. You know how, what is the normal thing. If you give it a couple of minutes and there are more people, then I'm fine. Otherwise, if you want me to start, I'll go right away. No issue.
We'll give them a minute or two. And
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think post-COVID, this has always been a bit of a, when you're in front of an audience, it's much easier to kind of,
Correct.
you try and establish some kind of connection, see how you're, but
We probably all of us can switch the videos on for a few minutes before the session.
that would certainly help. That would certainly help. Yeah.
But
The
then
only
once
issue
we
at
get
times
into
is the bandwidth and whether that. Yeah. But
No,
otherwise,
the initial few minutes, maybe all of you can switch on your videos so that we know that we are talking to real people. Sanket, Mandar, hey Amarjeet.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Marjit.
I've been doing.
Hey Mandar. Mandar is part of our marketing and branding team. So
Okay,
he was very enthusiastic about joining this session, and he said, "Yes, come on, you can."
Hi.
Hey Sanket.
Hi, Sanket.
Mandar, you're saying something? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So since I work in marketing, I thought I could, learn a lot of things by joining this session. So
I think it works both ways, Mandar.
Thanks.
It's always, there is never one right way in marketing.
Venu, we can start off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So let me just, right. Okay.
Yeah,
so
let me just give you a quick intro. Thank you to everyone for joining this session on branding. I know it's towards the fag end of the day, but please bear with us for the next 120 minutes or so. It is going to be a really insightful and engaging session. So we have Mr. Venugopal Nair here with us, who will be taking us through branding for the next 2 hours. He's the CEO of Ideascape, a branding and advertising agency, and he has over 35 years of experience in brand building, advertising, and design. He's worked with companies like Mudra, Saatchi and Saatchi, RK Swamy, BBDO, Brand Portrait, and has designed campaigns and branding strategies for several brands like Nile, Calvin Klein, Reynolds, Trigger, Asianet, to name a few. So it is a very prolific resume that I have right in front of me here, but I wouldn't take too much time. Over to you, Venu. So probably you can put in a few words there of
I will.
branding and more.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Raghuveer. So we've been discussing this for a little while. And unlike, I think, all the people in this group, I'm the reluctant entrepreneur. It's one of those things where entrepreneurship was forced on me. So I was in the creative stream of things. And as a creative director, you don't have to worry about the money aspect at all. So there's always someone who looks after the money. There's always somebody who goes and pitches to clients. There's already somebody who manages the business part of things. So when we started Brand Portrait in 2004, I had my partners who were essentially on the account side. There was a split in 2008, and I was forced to take over the company. Now that was, I think, a pivotal point as far as I was concerned. I was not young. And the team that was that stayed back actually came in and said that, look, if you run the place, then we're prepared to stick with you. So I'd never explored entrepreneurship until then. And frankly, it scared me. And I think, like it does a whole lot of people, I have immense respect for people who jump into this whole, entrepreneurship as a goal, because it can be it can be a huge high on certain days and it can be a complete low on others. It's like you never have the perfect kind of, and that's when you realize that salary is the first of the month only for the rest of the world of the people who are employed. As far as you're concerned, there are a lot of other priorities which take over. And once you're looking at things from running a company, your perspective literally undergoes a 180 degree twist. You can't look at things the way they were before. So essentially, when it meant looking at branding from a business perspective, I have a lot to thank the clients who came on board after I took over from the business side of things, because that really helped me understand a whole lot of other things which were not clear to me in the beginning. Namely, why is it that cash flow is so important? What is it that, how do you deliver value? And what is it that customers perceive as value? Because these are two ends of the spectrum. You think you're delivering value, but actually until somebody is buying it, you're not delivering value. It's like the classical thing about property. You put a price on it and it only goes for a certain amount, and that's the perceived value. So I think this is a constant search. So on IPOs, people will say you left money on the table, whereas others will say, no, it got the right price. So this is an eternal debate that never really gets solved. So let me start this whole session off by taking a look at some of the lesser known branding stories from India. Okay. And what I'll try and do is to sort of just give me a minute. Is it showing?
Yes, Wayne.
Okay. When I sent that thing yesterday, it said branding works because our imaginations work far better than reality. And that is the truth, because if you look at it, the brand is an illusion. It exists in our minds. It exists in places that there was a wonderful experiment that one of the senior members in the organization, when we were there, said, okay, he brought in a bottle of Coke and Pepsi and then poured it into different glasses, and then asked people to come in later without the bottles being seen. And he asked, where was the brand? So at that point, even the people who had poured the, who were not part of that thing, were not able to differentiate one from the other. So what you were consuming is essentially what you think is what you deserve to be. So what this workshop will cover is, in the first 1 hour, I'll be going over some of the lesser known brand stories. I think we've all heard of the Zerodhas and the Flipkarts and the, all the big, the Udans who are constantly in the news. But I'd like to look at some of the lesser known brand stories from India. And then I don't know if the actual, the people who responded to my questions are there. But what I'd like to do is to take individual conversations with each of them and see how they're approaching the entire aspect of defining who their customer is. Because unless you know exactly what is the value that you're delivering, it becomes difficult to create a brand. You can interrupt me at any point with questions. I don't have an issue at all, because this is not one of those things where, I discovered early on that interactive presentations, I would have loved to have this in person, where I actually see people and I can see reactions, including the yawns. But the whole point is that this is not, video calls are not a medium meant for feedback. So it's one of the things where it is again like a projection. And we're discovering that the difference between projection and reality can be huge. Now, if we go back, there was a point when, branding is a fairly recent phenomenon, except for the whole branding on cows and stuff like that. But in the agrarian economy, labor was exchanged to create value. Okay. In the industrial economy, material exchanges fueled value. But what we now call the attention economy, capture of attention has become the way to create value, or the way to define value. And it's not very clear at this point what exactly is being exchanged. Yes, I'm giving you my attention, and you are sending or giving stuff to me. So whether it's search or whether it's social media, I'm spending time on things. But what is the actual benefit on both sides is still very unclear. Now, in the case of a physical product, or in the case of agriculture, or in economies, it was fairly clear as to what each of these exchanges entailed. But now it's getting harder and harder to do that. So let's take an analogy. Okay. Why do we need branding and advertising at all? Okay, my simple answer is, how else will the world know about you? If you have a different way, wonderful. And people often use this, they keep throwing this stuff saying that Google and Facebook and Amazon really never used advertising. Apparently, Google and Facebook spent about $2 billion last year on advertising. Okay, so here's one way to depict the progress of a company. Okay, imagine that sales is the second hand, marketing is the minute hand, and branding is the hour hand. So unless the seconds pass by, that is, unless there is a stream of revenue that is created at every point in a company's existence, there is no way that there will be money for anything else. It's like cash flow defines every other thing. So you can forget about what the brand is, or you can forget about marketing, unless there is cash flow and unless there is sales. So the fundamental problem is, how do you define, or how do you begin to ensure that the sales just come in at a constant thing, and then once the sale comes in, or you find a position that defines value, then the question is, how do I take this further? Where does this go to the next level? How do I begin to expand this? Is there a base of customers that I can begin to build on, and then take it from there? So let me start with a few fairly, less known brand stories. So there was this company called .com Infoway. And if you look at the relationship between media and the customer, there's water always available. But the customer doesn't drink all the time. Even if there's a watering hole in the middle of a jungle, animals go there only when they're thirsty. If they're not thirsty, there is no way that they will come to the watering hole. So to a large extent, we are stymied about the access to customers until we can actually begin to talk to them. Now, this company, .com Infoway, was an IT company, like a lot of other IT companies at the time. And they had started in the early 2000 and 2007. One difference was that they had created this magazine called Galata, which was a printed magazine. Now, it was one of few English magazines covering the South Indian film scene and largely the Tamil Nadu industry, the Tamil industry, because they were based out of Chennai. So obviously Axis defined which production houses, which actors, which technicians they interviewed. And they started their own film magazine back in 2007. Because they were an IT company and iPhone was launched in 2007, on a lark, they actually went ahead and created an app for .com for Galata in 2007. Now, 14 years later, the world is overrun with apps, and the problem seems to be how do you get people to download an app and then actually start using it? But if you go back to 2007, the problem was that apps were simply, people were just discovering what apps were. And within a year or so, these guys had hit about 200,000 downloads, which was, I think, a lot more than their circulation was, which was extremely interesting as far as they were concerned. Now, the question is, where does it go from there? In the sense, yes, I have got, an app which seems to have traction, but where do I take it from there? And in a way, the question was answered when various other people and various other media, companies came to them, and then they said, "Look, hey, why don't you develop an app for us on the same thing?" And they saw the outline of a business idea. So, what happens if I create virtual magazines for each one of the people who come to me? And then they embarked on this whole thing where they said, "We'll digitize everything that's available and then offer it." So the inspiration obviously was a newsstand. Now, if you look back in India, it's like practically at every street corner you had newsstands. And one of the things before before the net came along and people started, lived on their mobile phones and laptops, people used to stop at the magazine stand and buy a book or a magazine for the journey. And this was typical behavior. So newspapers and magazines were all sold at these kiosks, which were available in the neighborhood. And that was a place where either a Sunday edition of various other newspapers, all that was picked up. Now, .com Infoway decided that they would create a digital newsstand. And that was how Maxter came into being. Now, Maxter claims to be the world's largest reading destination with thousands of magazines and newspapers. So it works fine on the desktop. But if you were to go down into mobile screens, you'll still find that there's a lot of and you can understand the problem, because if you look at newspapers and magazines, they are, broadsheets, and they can stretch literally the length of your, both your hands open. And here you have a mobile phone, which is essentially one column in a newspaper. So trying to fit that whole thing into a newspaper, into a single column, poses all kinds of technical and other issues. Now, we've gone the other way with, it's become, digital publishing has exploded, and you have everyone from Zenio to Issue to a whole lot of people who are currently available. So thousands, this is, and corporate magazines, everything is the same. But one of the problems that still remains is the mobile experience leaves a lot to be desired, whereas the tablet and the desktop experience to a large extent is okay. The problem is you don't want to be sitting at a desk and then reading the same thing that you would, because the experience is you lounge somewhere and pick up a magazine, flip through the pages, and then see what's happening. So I think there's some way to go out there. But they've made their, this is the current thing. And the other thing, now here's the strange part, that they give you an annual subscription for 1,000 rupees where you can read 5,000 magazines. Now, if you were to look at that, you'd barely cover, I think, about 1%. Now, we seem to be inundated by, the digital economy seems to be give it a waterfall, let people search what they want for and consume what they want. But this amount of choice is actually creating more confusion than adoption. Now, moving on to the second one. Tea and chai are worlds apart. So what exactly do I mean? That is, it's exactly the same product, or at least it's grown in the same way. It all is, the only difference is how it is presented to people. Now, this is Siliguri in Assam. It's a shot of Siliguri, and obviously it's one of those heavenly looking places. Looks absolutely wonderful. And the Dugar tea estate grows tea in Siliguri. Now, 70 years. For 70 years, they've been growing tea. And the best teas, the buds, the most flavored, the best parts of the tea are all exported. They're not, Indians as a the large mass of populations across the world have this combination of strength and flavor. They don't want to just have flavor. They definitely need a tea which has body, which is the way that the normal tea drinkers like it. So here's your daily cup. Even this glass looks a little sophisticated because we all see those lined glasses, which are just, they're literally like a shot. And this happens several times a day, irrespective of how swanky the environment is in which people are working in. The local tea shop is the place for everything from gossip to catching up with friends. Now, Kishore Dugar, who was the son of the next generation, went to the US, did his stint in investment banking, then decided to come back to India. And he wanted to get into the export part. He didn't want to do the regular tea business. So he says, okay. Now, he decided that he would create an online portal. Now, the problem with an online portal is that when you serve an expensive tea, in the real world, you can go to a 5-star restaurant and without blinking an eyelid, you will pay 250 rupees for the same cup of tea that you pay for 10 rupees outside for. No questions asked, because you're paying for the experience and the ambience. But if you're doing it online, how do you convey the same luxury? How do you get people to buy into an expensive tea when they can't drink it, they can't smell it, they can't feel it? So he goes to this Pentagram, which is among the best known design houses in the world, and they create digital identities for you. They create branding identities. Now, if you look at this, it's a very recognizable cup of tea. But there's one part of it which is intriguing, which is essentially this part. Okay. Now, look at the prices of the tea. This was a capture from there. So there's a mango strawberry black. They've differentiated between the teas because it's not as if there is milk poured into these glasses and you get to see what the teas are like. So there's mango strawberry black, which is for 50 grams, you pay 500 rupees. And there's something called Castleton Moonlight Spring White, which is 5,000 rupees for 100 grams. So 40 cups of tea, you pay 5,000 rupees, which is over 100 rupees per cup. You pay 50,000 rupees for 1 kilo of tea. Now, but if you look at it, you somehow believe that this is expensive. There is no way that this comes across as cheap. So how do you create that whole image? How do you create the brand? Depends on several factors. So if you look at this, now the amount of time and effort that would have gone into creating this, the cups, the table, the backdrop on which it was shot, everything says that this is an expensive cup of tea, including the comments. But, we won't go there. Okay, on to the next brand. Now, this is a game that is extremely popular in India. But the crazy thing is, it has never been marketed. So the story begins, I think, somewhere in the 1970s or 80s, when, Kabaddi. And this is what Kabaddi is like. It requires nothing. It just requires a ground, which is, a badminton court area. It requires a line in the middle. It requires a line along the sides. And it requires 12 to 14 enthusiastic, burly players. And this is a very physical game. So there's nothing sophisticated or, this thing about it. It's all about action and brute force. Now, this is a game that is celebrated in the villages of India, but in the urban centers, you won't find too many people playing Kabaddi. Cricket has taken over. It's taken over the national consciousness, the imagination, the space for growth, everything. Now, this journey to becoming the pro league was actually quite fascinating. So Charu Sharma was a commentator, was an athlete of note, and then became a commentator across several languages, was invited by one of the world's, apparently there's a body in the world which provides commentators for national, international sporting events. Now they got in touch with Charu Sharma and told him that they wanted a commentator for Kabaddi. And then, so Charu Sharma came in, and he was not even aware that this was very popular. So when he went to village after village, he saw the amount of involvement and action and the passion with which people played the game. Now the question is, how do you structure this? How do you make sure that you take this game, which has, and that is the other reason that this game never took off. It doesn't require anything. So you don't require shoes, you don't require a net, you don't require rackets, you don't require a ball. So none of the manufacturers of any of these products would be interested in sponsoring it because they get nothing out of it. There's nothing really for them in the actual sport. So what do? They went to Star and they said, okay, why don't you put this up? So in terms of production values, let's see how it can go up. And they already had a template to build upon, which is IPL. Now, if you look at this versus this, now what does it change? The shoes have come in, uniforms have come in. The whole arena looks a lot more swankier than that dusty, backdrop that you see out here. They got the graphics to work like crazy. They got the best photographers to come in and shoot. And this really is not as expensive. And this is what gives it the kind of big game feel. So you had these group of people, all unknown. And that was the other decision that they took, that they made it a league versus making a tournament. So what is the difference between a league and a tournament? A league is something that can stretch on for weeks. So I can get groups of people to play each other or play between each other. And that leads to many more matches being played before the elimination rounds. So that takes a couple of months and then allows for a lot of television programming to happen. So for 2 months, and they created a format where 20 minutes, so 40-minute game. And they got all of these. They got people from Bombay, they got people from Jaipur, they got people from Agra, they got the whole set of teams together. They began to do, stories about their life and how the entire thing went on. And when it took, I think, close to about 7-8 years for this to finally launch, there were the other good, happy coincidences that happened, because Charu Sharma is apparently related or closely related to Anand Mahindra, who has an interest in tractors. So tractors became one of the things that were there. But the clinching point was getting Star TV on board. Now, this is where the illusion gets destroyed. If you were to compare this with an IPL stadium, you will see that this is a tournament that holds barely 2,000 people, whereas our cricket stadiums hold 1 lakh people. So here's where you create that whole aura of a game being much bigger than it is. So like they say on the internet, no one knows who you are. On TV, you can create this impression of a much bigger, which I think the baseball and NBA and all of those had done that. So which was the format for how it came to India as well. So you had you had the traveling camera, you had the amazing footwork that was done by a whole lot of the cameramen who covered the events. And then this soaked into the national consciousness, because people loved, they may not like playing Kabaddi, but they sure loved watching it. which showed in the ratings because I think this got close to about 70-80% of the kind of views that IPL got. But the game that is behind the scenes is where the agreement between Star TV and the Pro Kabaddi League. Now, Star TV holds all the thing, and apparently that contract was supposed to come up for bidding in 2021. But I'm sure that that game will never be played under the arclights. What happens there is a different story altogether. Now, here's a sense of going back in time to sell a product. Okay, so would you pay for the same product in different forms? It seems a little crazy, but why would you do that? I mean, once you buy a product, then unless it really wears out, or you wouldn't buy. But we have, and what is the product? It's music. So anyone who's into their, who has known music right from the 60s and 70s knew that you bought a whole collection of cassette tapes. And then when the CDs came in about 10 years later or 15 years later, you bought all the CDs as well. And now, of course, you go into Spotify and you get, whatever it is that you, the streams. So today, everyone on their mobile phone has the collection that probably the large music studios in India would have had back in the 60s or 70s. But it doesn't matter because, we've got these genres of music, you've got this whole thing. And the younger generation is very, very comfortable. People in the digital natives, as they called, do not want, they're perfectly fine to, select their music, find out, make playlists, figure out what exactly they want. But the digital laggards, the people who are in their, 40s, 50s, and 60s, or even in the 50s and 60s, don't want to swipe and try and figure out what is happening. And this was where Saregama or HMV realized the potential. So Saregama had 100-year stock of music. The question is, how do you sell this over and over and over again? So they tried everything. They came up with, they got people to come in and record the old tracks with in newer studios. The sound looked better, though they kept the original voices of Kishore and Lata and Rafi and all of the others. So they had it across all languages and across all Indian things. But the question is, how do you get a new generation of people to buy? And this is where I think they were struck by a brainwave. Now, what do? They knew that people wanted physical buttons. They didn't want anything that was virtual. This was their assumption. And the result was Saregama Karwan. Now, if you look at this, you have a screen. So this is basically a transistor with a hard disk and a display screen. There's nothing more than. That's all that it is. And while the normal transistor would retail for 400 and 600 rupees, with nostalgia and with the touch added, this sold for 6,000 and 7,500 rupees. And they sold 500,000 of this in just 1 year with hardly any push. The moment it came in, it went out into the market. It's almost as if people looked at it and said, yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. And they bought it. So this is one product that didn't need, because it's as if you recognized a need that people hadn't told you about, but you somehow were clued enough to understand that the reason people weren't buying a product is because it's not because they didn't want the ease of use that mobile phones or Spotify or any one of these Gaana provided. Okay, next one. Now, anyone who has seen cricket in the 70s and 80s and 90s again knew that getting tickets for a cricket match was next to impossible. Going into the ticket stall and then trying to actually see if you can get something going was, you got lathi charged, and this is the problem. So this is where Ashish Hemrajani thought that he had found a place of Book My Show. Now, the inspiration for Book My Show, at least that's what he claims, is that he had gone to South Africa, and then he heard a radio ad which was talking about the benefits of buying tickets online. So it offered a lot of freebies to people who would buy tickets to rugby matches in South Africa. And he was struck by that. He's saying, look at this. The ticket reaches the person. The person doesn't have to go and buy the ticket. Isn't that a wonderful way to look at this? Now, in the late 90s, nothing was ready. We had moved slightly past the 33.3 kbps speeds that you got on modems, and it was barely enough to download an email or with an attachment. So if you had anything, at that time, large files were 6 and 7 MB. So in 1998, he set up what is essentially a call center, and then he would negotiate with theater producers because he needed volume. So the only way you could get volume for events in India was to have something every day. Plays and all that were weekends. Dramas, everything else was weekends or for 3 months in a year. So if you have to have constant interaction on the platform, the only way you can do it is to corner a portion of the movie tickets. And I remember how difficult it was initially, where theaters would first give only 1 or 2 rows in the entire theater for online booking portals. Otherwise, they still expected you to come to the theater and pick it up. That slowly changed. But what happened is he was able to build a company that actually went and supplied the tickets or understood what behavior was, and it improved one step at a time. So this is where it started. And then they realized that there is huge potential in India to even bring events in. So by this time, in about 2015-16 onwards, they claimed that they were getting as much as a traffic of close to 14-15 million views per month, and they were selling about 500,000 tickets, which is very decent. So they actually managed to get Cirque du Soleil. They had to, they were looking at even getting 4 large venues in India where they could have events. And then, see, our economy, I think, works very differently from how the Western. So there they had the opera houses, they had the stages, which is why stage design and a lot of production design has moved very far ahead, as opposed to India, which is still in very small pockets and the production budgets are very small. So we don't have the broad infrastructure that is available for events or the audience that has been developed over time. Now, Broadway is able to put up a show every day of the year. And they have, a recent one, they actually went up to $1 billion for bidding. This recent, I don't remember the name of that. And of course, Book My Show was very badly hit during the pandemic. But the way they tried to get around this was to try and get online events in. And they were looking at streaming, which was not available on a Netflix or a OTT platforms. But obviously, it meant that they were looking for the same share of attention, which has already been distributed with, and as it is, the numbers for these are fairly small. So it's a question of how will they come out of this and how will they actually manage once the pandemic comes out. Now, this is a sense of actually selling, what do you say, coal to Newcastle, as they say, or ice cream to Eskimos. Now, in the 90s, again, 80s and 90s, cousins living abroad were in great demand for 2 or 3 things: chocolates, clothes, and liquor. So these were kind of on the wish list of every relative who was coming in from abroad and would, come with, like Santa Claus with, and invariably it was the high-end liquor which was in great demand, even though there are people who were locally available. And like someone said that India sells more scotch than is manufactured in Scotland, but that was more of an aside. Now, but there were a few companies who looked at this and then said, why is it that we can't make these whiskies, single malt? And that's where it started. So Amrut decided that it would make a single malt whiskey. And they took nearly 8 to 10 years to actually get it going. But the point which, they didn't sort of create the whiskey and sell it in the Indian market. They began to compete with the big boys in global whiskey, sessions, the ones that rated whiskey on a global level, which is the best one. It took them about 3 to 4 years of entry, but I think by around 2005 to 10, they were already in the top 3. And Amrut began to be seen as a premium whiskey by whiskey drinkers abroad. So how did this happen? How did this whole turn happen? I have people who were in the IT industry who said that clients who came in for visits to India would say, hey guys, have you, I'd like to pick up some Amrut for my trip back. And then they turn around and say, what is Amrut? And they say, no, it's the whiskey that you guys make. It's a single malt available in India. And Amrut actually makes a whiskey apparently, which costs close to $100,000. I mean, 100,000 rupees, not dollars. Obviously, that would be too high. And here's the strange part. Now, Scotch whiskey is defined by the number of years that it, it stays in casks and barrels and ages because of the peat and everything else. But apparently in India, humidity is actually apparently very good for whiskeys. So India is able to compress that entire time frame and prepare the high-end whiskeys at a much lower. So you can get a 12-year-old whiskey in about 6 years. I'm not sure of the exact, but you can read it up and then figure out what is the exact thing. So we actually have a massive advantage in terms of the production. And Goa is the place where this has almost been taken over. So it's not just Amrut anymore. We've got Rampur, we've got at least 4 or 5 other brands which are now vying for this whole honor of. So it just tells you that it doesn't require, it's almost as if when you look at it and you say, okay, Scotch whiskey, and it's that aspirational thing, and suddenly we're making it ourselves and we're selling it to them. Okay, this is apparently that Greedy Angels is supposed to be the one which is the, okay. Now, we have IKEA, which I was told when IKEA opened in, what do you say, Hyderabad last year, there was this massive, not last year, a couple of years ago, saying that there were traffic jams in that whole area and people had blocked up the entire place. And IKEA is a brilliant, I mean, it sells in billions and it's got a very clear focus, that is the DIY, make it yourself kind of thing, which has always been, because they understood early on that if you are involved in creating the what do you say, brand, making it yourself, then the chances that you will stay with that brand is much higher. So everything from beds to chairs to tables to what have you, they did this whole thing. Now there's this Indian brand which came in, and I don't know if any of you, any guesses which brand this is?
That's Chumbak.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. So Chumbak is the Indian brand, which is obviously not big enough to take on IKEA, but the whole point is this, that, and here's the strange thing, that Chumbak came in, Shubhra Chadha is the person who is the founder along with Vivek Prabhakar. Now, when I went into the background, I was wondering, why is it that somebody like, would be interested, or what is the background of some, a person who looks at creating a brand like this? So Shubhra Chadha used to work with a filmmaker, an advertising filmmaker, and she worked in the art department. Now, what does the art department do? The art department has to source a whole lot of knickknacks to create the atmosphere in a film. So let's say you want to create a house from the 1930s. So one is the location. So you go into a house and you look at everything else. But the other things are, how do you get the little knickknacks? How do you get the photo on the wall, the pillars, the articles of use at the time? And there are everything from chor bazaars to these people who deal with furniture and various other things who are. So she actually had to tap into a massive network, which she did for about a year and a half. And that's where I think she found that, hey, this is something that has not been exploited at all. So she took on this whole thing of creating an Indian brand which can depict India, but is still sophisticated enough. So you didn't have, for example, one of the things, the problems that, we make some of the brightest chadars, the Jaipur daris and all that we make are brilliantly colored. But they're not seen as like the Western equivalent. The Western colors are far more muted. So they have grays and blues and purples, and they don't have the vibrant colors that India has. But Chumbak actually made that its distinctive advantage. So they started out with the fridge magnets, and then they expanded to kiosks within stores. So they looked at that whole thing of, let's see if I can get a small place to sell within a store. And when they saw that slowly begin to escalate, then they created their own sort of stores so this is Shubhra Gupta. And the other thing is the mascot. I think one of the unusual parts so the Chumbak magnet uses the owl, but the owl is not strictly recognizable as just one form. They've taken a mascot and applied it in different ways right across the spectrum. So you will find it in a dari, you will find it in a bedspread, you will find it in a scarf, you might find it on clothes. And if you were to compare the product range of Chumbak and IKEA or any of the other brands, you'll find that there's something distinctive. And they worked with designers from India, and they worked from NIT. And by then, it was almost as if you had to create something that was uniquely Indian, but which satisfied Western tastes as well. Because ultimately, if you're going global, that has to reflect in customers abroad wanting what you make as well. So if you walk into a Chumbak store, it's very different from the IKEA store. And obviously, it's meant to be that way, because that is what defines the brand. Now, this is a story of Indian ingenuity, because any guesses as to which is India's biggest deodorant brand?
Georgie, you're on mute.
Yeah. Pardon me?
I think Georgie wanted to speak.
And Unilever would be the company, but
okay, it isn't. Any other guesses?
Right now, I think it's Fog.
I'm inclined to say Fog.
Yeah, absolutely. Fog is India's largest deodorant brand. Okay. Now, here's the strange thing. It doesn't call itself a deodorant. It calls itself India's #1 perfume body spray. Fog sold 900 crores worth of deodorant, I think, in 2019. And it is what I'd call a slipstream brand. So what is a slipstream? You allow others to create the category, and you ride on the success of the category expansion by taking away the customers. So you have the Niveas, the Axis, and all of the others talking about the need for deo sprays, and they do the job of creating the market. And this guy comes in, does nothing of the imagery. And here's the strange part. Fog doesn't have a website. It doesn't have its own social media team. So what does it do? It creates ads. So in 2020, they're building a brand like it would be done in 1980. He has amazing distribution, and he knows that market. This is the Ketan Patel, I think, from Paras Pharma, the man who did crack and various other things. Extremely savvy about the whole market. So what does he do? This is the kind of thing that no agency would ever have come up with. I'll be honest in admitting that, because no agency would go and tell a client that your launch line is no gas, only perfume. Okay. That was the proposition on which Fog launched, which seems crazy because you're selling a perfume deo spray on a rational argument. Now, what he knew very clearly is that nobody would buy perfume or deo without first trying it out. So he created this army of distributors, and he made them the hero of his commercials. So you have these very simplistic commercials. You have this guy walking into a shop and he says, कौन सा एक deo spray चाहिए, and that guy gives you and he says, Fog hai, it has this, it has that. It's almost like a feature list. This is everything that the rules of advertising tell you not to do, not to ever do. And he goes ahead and does that and walks away with the entire market. Now, what appeals is that, and he also made it very carefully neutral. There is no hint of any sexual suggestion. This is, as you would call it, the censored version of deodorants. So you don't go for the tangents, you didn't go for any of the other undertones. It just said, you want to smell nice, come to Fog. And you have these commercials which are incomprehensible. You have two guards walking in a place and then saying, "Aaj kya chal raha hai? Fog chal raha hai." What does it mean? But chal raha hai in India means that daud raha hai. It's doing well. So they give you this impression of fog bahut chal raha hai. India mein bahut chal raha hai. So there's this native intelligence that comes into play. And I don't think Axe and Nivea and all of the others have found a way to counter this. Because it's like you're stuck in this whole thing of saying, but he knows his customers. He's not looking for the young teenager who looks at style. He's not looking for any one of those who moves around in hallowed circles and says, okay, you're smelling good. He's not looking at that tier of customers at all. But because of that, he has this massive market which he's created. So of course, I think now he's trying to get into perfumes, and this was among the first that he came in. You know, he said that you get only gas, whereas he shows you perfumes. He tries, which is this I've really not heard very much of, and I don't think it's as successful as he'd probably like it to be. And this is the man, Darshan Patel. Now, this is an Indian success story that would only be possible after the e-commerce boom. Now, if you've heard of this company called ImageKit.io, what does it do? All that it does is that it acts as the backend for e-commerce companies. It serves over 1 billion messages, 1 billion images a day. So if you look at Nykaa, if you look at Big Basket, if you look at all the other e-commerce portals in India which are doing well, not the Amazons and the Flipkarts, it's the second tier. They all require this massive compression in images, because image management is among the key things for an online store. And this guy realized it early on, came up with the algorithms, came up with the service to, so this is the kind of CDN network that they've already built in place. And it's available. So if you're, the crazy thing about e-commerce is that, like window shopping, it costs the shopper, in a store, having window shoppers makes no difference at all. But in an e-commerce store, window shopping consumes bandwidth, because anybody who's scrolling and not buying is actually using up your bandwidth. So how do you optimize the use of images? How do you can't get away by not showing them the images. And you have to show the images. The images have to look as good on a mobile screen as they do on a tablet, as they look on a desktop. There are algorithms, there is an entire workflow in place. And I know there are backend teams back in Chennai. And I was speaking to one of them, and he said that they do image corrections for some of the American portals. And they do 10 to 12,000 images per day. So what comes in is they've got a list. They've got the image, it comes in, they've got the large raw format or the final touched up image which is available, which is about 1 GB. That has to be put into multiple boxes. So they touch it up briefly, put it into each one of those boxes. It's like a workflow. So each one takes not more than 30 or 40 seconds on each image. Then that is uploaded to the drive. And like damage in ports, where, if you keep the article for more than 4 days, you have to start paying a fine. So they've got 14 terabytes of backup. But all that, they say, if within 3 days, if it's not taken, they start charging the customer more for not taking the images off their platform. So ImageKit.io, if you look at their website, it is extremely instructive in how they manage images. So they have a very small set of customers whom they're aiming at. They're very clear in their offering, and they know that it's only the tech teams which are looking at managing images who are their customers. It's not even so they ensure that they optimize the heck out of those, the thing, and that's how they've got to where they are. And now they've got to video as well. I just saw it, when I took a look, I realized that, yes, because video is going to be the next thing that every single e-commerce site has to optimize for. There's no getting away from it. So they've already positioned themselves to move into video and then look at how you can get video. So there's this constant, bandwidth increases, then you try and force more things onto it. As the bandwidth keeps increasing, what you can do, so 3D and augmented reality and virtual reality and all of that will come. But that is a slow process. So in the intermediate, how do you make money? That is the other thing which has to be thought through. And to end this particular thing, so you would think that in most cases, movies actually are the places where branding really takes root. So we talk of, the reviewers are dismissive. They say this actor is repeating himself. They like stereotypical. They don't do. And in this thing, in Hindi cinema, at least the times of Rajesh Khanna and Amitabh Bachchan, it was a superstar. You never had an everyman hero. Now, if you look at Ayushmann Khurrana, he started out as a TV thing. Then he played that. He was a VJ. He was not really an actor in that sense of the word. A singer, a middling singer, not apparently one of the, but obviously pretty good at what he. But the thing is that he understood the exact point at which he had a connect with people, and the industry had moved to the point where his kind of stardom was possible. There were others. I mean, you could have said that Naziruddin Shah came from an earlier set of things, and he kind of fitted that bill of the other movement that happened in Indian cinema. But this was the guy who came to it. And if you look at the career trajectory, so Channel V, there was this thing. Roadies, I think he was the head of one of those things. Now, this is the film that brought him into the limelight. Now, if you look at this, Vicky Donor was about a sperm donor. Now, this is a script that none of the mainstream stars in India wanted to be identified with. It was made by an advertising filmmaker, which again, none of the main. So there very clear relationship. There is very clear bonding between people who are in the same business, who understand what kind of markets they're making films for. So this film about a sperm donor created by an advertising guy had no takers whatsoever until Shujit Sarkar and this guy came into being. And this was a sleeper hit. It was one of those things that nobody expected would really turn out to be a massive hit, and it did. Now, it took almost 7-8 years where he made films like Nautanki Sala, which no one remembers. But then he started off with this Dam Laga Ke Haisha, which is about this mid-town, small-town boy getting married to a girl who's actually overweight. Now, this romance is not something that is part of so it's always rich boy, poor girl, or poor boy, rich girl. It's always about families squabbling. It's not about the daily. We've never had a single romance where there's a dark girl and a fair guy. It's almost as if there are certain subjects which are taboo. You shouldn't be talking about them, even if every marriage classified talks of wheatish complexions and how they get around this whole thing of dark skin. For a guy, it's not a problem, but for girls, it can be which I realized when I was working on Forever, and that brand, which it has its own set of dimensions. Andhadhun. Now, one of the things that Ayushmann Khurrana is very clear about is that he's an ensemble actor. That is, he has a set of actors around him. He's part of the plot. He's an important pivot in the plot, but he's not the only reason. It's not as if they're coming to see Ayushmann Khurrana alone, which is why he gets away with something like creating India's first gay romance. And though it wasn't much of a success, there was no controversy, if you recall. Absolutely none. So that is, I think, the ultimate point of figuring out what is your genre, figuring out where the audience will accept you, figuring out the range of what you can do and can't do, and then taking it forward to that. So Article 15 is something that he experimented with. Apparently, he's saying the pandemic has kind of put this thing in everyone's, but that's where we are. So with that, I've come to the end of the first hour. And these are my coordinates. I send out a weekly newsletter, which is ideascape.substack.com. I've been writing every day on LinkedIn for almost a year, for more than a year. And before that, I used to write on my blog. So I covered about 40, 50 brands. And I've never done this from the advertising standpoint, in the sense I've not looked at an ad and tried to dissect the brand. Because I think that's like looking at a room through a keyhole and then trying to figure out what the room is like. Brands exist within markets, they interact with customers, and there is a constant stress and strain. So trying to figure out where this entire thing works is essential. It's not just the campaign strategy that you should be planning. Where does your product or service fit into the larger scheme of things? How does it change, or how does it integrate? And why is it that people require your brand at all? Those, I think, are the questions that I try to wrestle with. Okay. I'd welcome any questions that people have.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Sir, often, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, my name is Nishi, and I come from a new startup known as University to Go.
Okay.
See, many of us, including myself, I know there's some difference, but there's always been a difference between marketing and creating branding awareness. And while I know it's related, but can you give us one difference between both? See, I'm marketing, so my business grows.
Yeah.
So, and again, sometimes my business doesn't grow, but the logo is out there and people are watching it. So, there's always a confusion. We know there's a difference, but there's a confusion all over in the market. I'll give you another example is on the Irani hotel where you get Irani chai, the board has Coca-Cola on it. So,
right. Okay. Let me sort of answer this. I'm not coming at it straight, because then I would have to, get into these oft repeated, what does marketing do? What does advertising do? Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd look at this as this whole scenario of broadcasting. Okay. There's the sea of voices out there. They could be brand voices. They could be, cultural voices. And people are saying things and doing things all the time. Now we consume them through a set of media, which could be the newspaper, which could be online. We go to various sites. Now, if a brand wants to enter into a conversation, it first has to figure in that conversation. So it's almost like if I'm driving along a certain route, I begin to notice a certain billboard, or I begin to notice certain signs along that path. So I think, to me, it's not about the creative part alone. It is about the consistency with which you're able to put the brand out there in the market and create the conversations. So if you don't do that, then I think it's not about, going out there and there's one massive campaign, so you get that immediate burst of attention. It's like that rush. And then that's not sustained. To me, it's a question of building that over time. And like you said, the Irani cafe is a fantastic example. Irani cafes have been around. They've come with the culture. The Iranians came in, they sort of decided how will they integrate with the thing, and they figured out that the chai was a massive hit. So the decor, the overall look and feel of the place, the meat samosas, which are not available in a lot of other places, became part of the milieu, became part of the culture. Now, I think essentially it's about that. It's about things that you respond and identify with and say that this is me. This is how I look at the world. And being a part of that and understanding that. And I think a lot of brands look at this and then say, okay, I need to be this. But I think the best way to do it is to try and understand how your customers view you. So that is always going to be a changing kind of target. It's not going to be the same. I don't think, unless it's a product which is, even if you say that a brand has been around for 30, 40 years, I don't think the customers are the exact same customers. They kind of come and go out. There are people who are, who will buy the brand unthinkingly. It all depends on so many behaviors. Now, certain categories we may buy without thinking, but there are certain categories which we're very, very conscious of, and that is related to how we are as people. So it becomes difficult to put it into a single slot. So I think as far as marketing goes and advertising goes, the first thing about the marketing aspect is to figure out, okay, where is it that I'm really, integrated with the market and my customers? Who are my customers? Why are they consuming my brand? Once you get a feel of that and translate that into advertising, I was surprised, for example, at the number of people for some of the products that we had advertised earlier. When we went back into the market and asked people, why are you buying it? They're playing the commercials back to us. They're telling us the same things that we told them in the commercial. So to a large extent, this becomes that line between, and if you were to say, when you break it down, if it's a normal product like a soap or shampoo, what is the difference between a good soap and a good shampoo? It's so subjective. It's down to the fragrance, it's down to the price, it's down to how I use it, the milieu in which it is used. And because these things are constantly in a state of flux, I don't think it's possible to bring it down to one particular thing and then say, because we are different people, not just within ourselves, but we are different people inside a family setup. We are different people in a professional setup, and we are different people when we approach strangers. So we all have extremely different opinions and views of the world. And I think that's what shapes us. And some of these, it's almost unconscious. I don't think we can bring it down to just one or two factors and then say, okay, this is what is important. That may be the dominant factor. But in most cases, I've tried this. I've tried to ask people, okay, go back and tell me why you invested, or you put this, you bought this particular car, or you bought this particular television. And it becomes difficult. You're not sure what is the exact, singular point that you decided on. I'm not sure I answered your question, but that is the best that comes across to me.
Right. Any other questions, or Ravenu, should we just pick up some startup cases? Otherwise, if anybody has any other questions. So, okay. All right. So 6 startups had given responses, and we have 4 of them here. We have Georgie from Thought, Raisin Customs, Trevon of Raisin Customs. Then we have Srikanth of Hala, and Kiran of Mobility. So you can go with any one of them.
Yeah, whoever is prepared to, who wants to go. I just want to have a conversation with each one of you. Thank you for responding. And I just thought I'd try and understand how you defined your customer and what were the thoughts that went through your mind when you were defining your market.
Shravan, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Hi, Kashyap. Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Yes. So regarding defining the customer, so firstly, I'll just tell you what we do. So our company is called Raisin Customs. It's an online marketplace for car accessories and customization services. So it's an e-commerce platform. So we ship the products all across the country, and we provide doorstep installation within Hyderabad.
Right.
Yes. So our major target audience is car owners, because we actually sells this customization accessories products. Who already have the cars and they're looking something extra from their car. It can be a lighting system or an audio system or an upholstery. Maybe it can be a comfort level, or maybe some aesthetic level, or a safety feature, something like that. So our main target is corporates, and we have actually defined it in such a way that since it's an online shopping, so we have targeted corporates who prefer online shopping, basically, and who doesn't have that much time to actually go to, take their car to a decor, wait there almost for, couple of hours and get it installed, and they're not sure of the brands and everything. So we target them so that we are providing the convenience as well, so that we are providing whatever the services are there, it's happening at the doorstep.
Okay. I took a quick look at your site, Shravan, and I think you had flagged off Seltos as one of the things, Kia Seltos?
Yes. So there are a couple of cars which are the fast moving cars right now. So we are actually kind of, we have recently started that, we started to make a packages for each and every car. So let's say if a customer has a Kia Seltos car. So generally what's happening is that right now is most of the car people are taking a low end variant of a car. And instead of going for a top variant, they're going for a low end variant and they're customizing, their as per their requirement. So few people, they might not need a sunroof, but why do they have to pay that much amount of money by taking a top end car? So they take a low end variant and they customize it. Maybe they want more of audio or they want more of upholstery or something like that. So we are trying to make it as a package for car wise specifically, so that for them it will be much easier to select a particular product.
Okay. How long have you been in business on this?
It's been 2 years. It's been 2 years since we were operating.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Because around the place where I have my office in Chennai, I find there are at least 3 of these shops available.
Correct.
Now, I find that, and they seem to be doing fairly well because they've been there right through the pandemic and they have not shut down. So obviously there is still a market for I'm just interested in, this was an interesting insight that it's people who buy a variant and decide that they will decide what they want to do.
Exactly.
Right?
So we wanted to give that freedom to them. Yes.
Okay. And is that, does that happen across the entire range of your cars, the set of people who are there?
Yes, it does. I mean, currently we are getting inquiry requests from the customers for mainly for the fast moving cars like a Hyundai Creta or Kia Seltos, Sonet. These are fastest cars, which are moving more quickly now. But slowly we are actually seeing some interest in the other range of cars, other set of cars as well. Yeah, so it's in the entire range actually.
Okay. So how would you classify these customers in the sense, how are you reaching out to them right now?
So currently there are 2 ways. So one is online, obviously using our digital marketing, Google, we're running some ads there and we are doing some Facebook, Instagram. We are posting regular photos and everything in Instagram. And the other part is we are doing some offline promotion as well. So our idea is not to target the whole country at one stretch. It's very difficult for us because we want to leverage our doorstep installation. So since we are doing it in one particular city, first we want to be a segment leader in one city. Then after that, replicate the same model in other cities also. So because of this doorstep installation, we have the freedom of actually doing some bigger customizations as well. So our order range doesn't limit to only a DIY product, but we can actually handle a bigger levels of customizations for a car. So in order to do that, we are doing some offline promotions as well. So we are trying to partner with car garages, second-hand car dealers, and also the showrooms. So we are not directly tying up with the showrooms because they won't tell us. But still, we are actually targeting the sales managers because sales managers are the people. They are kind of what should I say? For any car owner, for a customer, for a person who buys a new car, the first person is going to ask for any suggestions or something is the sales manager. So we are trying to get them in touch with them, and we have made a commission model for them. We told them that see if you can refer some customers to us, so we can help the customer as well, and we pay some commissions to them. So that's recently started working out. So we are trying to get more and more sales managers on board. So yeah, both offline and offline. These are the ways we are doing it.
And I think that probably works better than some of the digital advertising that you're doing, or does the digital stuff work better?
Yes, I mean, offline, it is working well, but again, there are few hiccups, some challenges are there. So it needs some personal interactions with each and every person. So they're not, they're not convinced by through a phone call or something like that. They have to get the first sale should happen. So first they have to get a commission so that they'll get that motivation that from the next time onwards I have to refer them. So in order to get that first sale itself, it's a very big challenge. So we are trying to work hard on it. We are not giving up on it. So whether if it is coming down or something. So yeah, hopefully we are thinking that that offline actually should work better than the online.
No, I think you've identified very clearly that the installation part is important. So that's like a point of touch with the customer.
Exactly.
And then that becomes the reason why the person decides to buy from you. And if he's happy and he gets the same value as opposed to going into a thing and you're personally going to them, it obviously creates, and that could, he's happy with it or she's happy with it, and that leads to increased word of mouth, and that leads, again, it's a very slow process, but ultimately that's the way I think this market will. So, okay, so you've got a set of cars that the fast moving cars are the ones you target, because you're saying there's a large base of cars which are selling. Then, so you don't sell, let's say, I mean, Dilip Shabria now, of course, because of his, but in the early days, he was the one who actually attacked that whole market and got it into one, the DC kind of car, which was supposed to be a massive upgrade from what people wanted in terms of looks and feel and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Do you have competitors in this this thing who are doing online exactly the same thing as you are?
Yes. There are many platforms actually who are selling accessories online, but none of them providing the doorstep installation. So we wanted to keep that as a very distinctive feature. So that's why we're focusing on that, and we are preparing checklists, because it's not that easy also. That's why it took us a long time. Actually, 1 year we suffered a lot. We faced all the problems while we are doing the installations. We understood, I mean, sometimes the tools will be missing. Maybe the technician went with the wrong set of tools, but we made the checklist right now. We made each and every process trying to be streamlined, so that now it's working perfectly fine. So the rejection rate also came down. So we want to take this as an advantage. Especially in the accessories market, people can purchase the accessory online. So audio system, let's say if I purchase a speaker, they can do it. But again, they have to go to some technician and get it installed. And there are some additional accessories which they have to purchase along with that. And there's a very restricted number of accessories which you can just purchase online and do it in the DIY. It's just a 30% of our category. Rest 60% of the category
requires some kind of intervention. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Shravan.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay. Who can I move to next? Who's
Georgie?
Yeah. Hi, sir.
Hi, Georgie.
Georgie.
Yeah, Georgie.
Yeah. So, sir, my company's name is Tot Academy. We are into kids extracurricular. So we are developing a platform for kids to learn different online extracurricular activities.
Okay.
Our website name is tot.academy.
Okay.
Now we started off. We launched the platform in this June. We launched with one course that's in hip hop dance. It's kind of like a short-term course which spans around 2 months. And our model is a combined model of live tutoring along with certain course materials that we prepare. So we create these course materials with industry experts. Say, for example, if it's dance, that would be created in partnership with a movie choreographer. If it's a painting, that would be created with a painting influencer. If it's a keyboard, that's the model. So like that, we introduced our first course in hip hop, then launched our painting course. And now this month we are launching 2 courses, one in keyboard as well as doodling. So our main ambition is to make this as an ecosystem where kids can really explore their passion. That is where we want to turn around things. We cater to the age group of 5 to 15, categorizing them into 3 segments: 5 to 8, 9 to 12, and 13 to 15. And we release different courses for these kids.
Okay, so how did you come up with the idea for this? What is the kind of inspiration?
Inspiration basically is from my own family. So it was during COVID. My sister was actually coming on to asking me whether. So her kids were mostly spending off time from academics in Netflix Kids and YouTube. So there wasn't much activity-oriented learning which they can have from their ease of home. So that is where I thought maybe so there are academic platform, big tech companies focusing only on the only on the academic side. But what about their passion and what about their interest? And there wasn't much. So the main competitors back then was like tutors who will be listing themselves on a platform, an aggregator platform, listing them for maybe $10, $12, and so on. But here, what we want to do is we want to bring in a result-oriented curriculum. After 2 months, they would be reaching at a particular level. So initially, we are introducing beginner-level program for these kids, and then slowly maybe releasing the second intermediate version and then taking them on board with that. So that is the model. So initially, we have right now around 50 paid customers with the platform, almost around 1,200 registered users within the platform who we have touched over the past 4-5 months. So we use two channels, both offline as well as online.
Okay.
Offline, we have an initiative called Open House. So Open House basically touches gated communities as well as schools and conduct a lot of events as well as competitions for these kids. Engage them with our brand and then slowly convert them for our free session. And from free session, when they are interested, they move to our paid program. When it comes to online, we haven't touched the performance marketing side yet. That's the paid campaign. Right now, we are touching this offline Open House. And second, we are using influencer campaign. And the third that we are actually trying out is something called a challenge-based program for a week. So we do a small campaign on social media as well as a small paid campaign, inviting them for a challenge. So this week we are conducting a challenge called Inktober. The theme is Inktober, where every day the kids will be given a theme to draw, and they have to submit on our group. They will be resharing on the group. So basically, it is an organic outreach that we are doing with kids. So they will be drawing and submitting this painting over the whole week. There will be a point system along with that, so kids can earn that point. At the end of that week, there will be a chart released to them, and the top winners will be getting some prizes and so on. So the same we are replicating for the Halloween theme called Spooktober. So there it is not only painting, there will be fancy dress competition, there will be a dance competition, but everything related to the specific Halloween, and every day there will be a theme that they have to execute. And the same thing they have to promote on socials. So there will be a virality created with it. So these are a couple of the online.
But all of this is done online. So even if it's a
all of this is done online.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Great. So, but post-pandemic, let's say in a couple of months with activity coming back to,
correct.
How do you see this?
Yeah. So moving forward, so our primary vision is basically to bring in a lot of the actual market as of now teaches kids maybe painting, dancing, and the generic courses which has a lot of tutors in the ecosystem, in the local ecosystem. But we want to build different interest-based courses, say for example, money management, maybe video editing, music production. So these are not geeky things that kids cannot learn. So kids knows how to play piano, but they don't know the end result of why piano should be learned. It is for creating music, and that is where the value is. So we are directing them to the next level where they can really utilize their passions, maybe on a future scale, maybe a breadwinning skill for themselves. So that is where our vision is, and we'll be creating such kind of courses which are not available locally.
Okay. So in terms of what do you do to get kids more socially engaged, or is it a one-on-one, or do I get
it would be so we have a group courses right now. So what we do is we have one teacher allocated for 4 kids. There will be 2 sessions within a week, and along with that we have the revisioning and practicing materials prepared by the course experts. So there we have a lot of animations created. So all the small steps would be broken down into small engaging videos so that they can come back to our platform, learn and revise.
Okay, great. So I think that gives me a good this thing of, I saw the website and I was wondering if there are schoolism and stuff like that are things which give you courses which are meant, like you said, at short-term creative pursuits, so more about painting and some of those music. But I see that you're actually going further in terms of taking it into something that a kid can not just learn, but it can actually be something that takes them further as far as the career goes, or as even if they just want to explore it to begin with.
Yes.
Today on a mobile phone, you can actually do a fair amount of editing of films, and I think that's going to be a very important part of. So again, formats like Canva and all that have made it much easier for you to create presentations, to create the thing, and that will only. And I think the more democratic it gets, the easier it gets to actually make each one of these things. And though there
Correct.
will be people who say that no, but the quality will come down. Ultimately, it's about how do you manage to, promote your own skills in order to get to that point.
Correct,
That's an
correct.
interesting experiment, and it's great that you're going into the extracurricular aspect as opposed to the
Yeah.
mainstream. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Venu, you want to pick two more?
Yeah.
Kiran,
And it
go
depends.
next.
Are the others? See, my whole point is, I don't know if you are interacting between yourself. For me, it's a learning to actually figure out what is happening on each one of these things, because I just saw them as startups in the thing. So to actually meet the people who are behind this is an interesting exercise.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know what each one of them is doing in order to further that market, because each one of these, there is a huge amount of competition. So it's not just the brand part, it's again the question of how do you build your business. Yeah.
Go ahead, Kiran.
Good evening. This is Kiran here from Mobility.
Hi,
Thank
Kiran.
you. Yeah.
Hi.
So I'm founder of Mobility.
Okay.
We are a movie review app.
Okay.
Mobility.com. Movilti.com.
Okay.
And we are here to disrupt movie review vertical,
Okay.
if I can call that within the media and entertainment industry.
Right.
So there are already competitive players. We have we have created a new category called video review. It doesn't exist. So
Okay.
that's the biggest challenge we would be facing, or we are facing from a branding perspective. We have a well-defined thought process of go-to-marketing strategy, but the challenge is to create a brand which we are about to disrupt, like Ubers or Airbnb, etc.
Where exactly do you see? See, because reviewing now, there are these sites on YouTube, which is Every Frame a Painting, or Nerdwriter. Those who break down films beautifully and don't do the job of a conventional reviewer, in the sense that, okay, this is what the film is about, this is what the plot line is, this is what the acting is like, and go, no go. So I don't know where this market exists, or who exactly do you think is the consumer? Because today, if you look at each one of these films, when the moment they get released, so I was watching this thing from Film Companion where Shekhar Kamula's new film, which is Love Story, the kind of initial, and there are hundreds of people commenting on it in the YouTube reviews or in the songs. So how do you create a space where this becomes a destination?
Okay, great question. Yeah, that's what we are trying to create. And the new category which we are creating is the video review, which is on YouTube. And again, to find someone on YouTube is a huge challenge. It's an ocean.
Right.
Yeah, and we want Mobility to be the go-to review app, because that's where users can review either text or video. We're giving a 360-degree view of reviews of a particular movie from a critic's perspective and a user perspective.
Okay.
And we are an AI-based review app. So it's just not aggregation. We are trying to be on top of all the review silos.
Okay. I think, I'm not sure of this, the company, I think it was called something to do, JK. I think it's called, Letterbox. Letterbox, allows you to make playlists of the films you like and do it in a social way, right?
Yeah, they're basically socializing their playlist or their watch list.
Okay.
Yeah, they're saying that, okay, this is what I like, but it's not to a point where they are actually reviewing exactly. And then, to be honest, I think eventually, that will be part of our pipeline eventually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you get the idea for this? What was the motivating part for you to start off on something like this?
I'm a fusion of an IT and a filmmaker.
Okay.
So I made a film in the US. It's a student film, and I tried to release it worldwide. and I saw that there was a challenge. There was no alternate to a theater business for regional films.
Right.
I was thinking something, not just me and my co-founder, we were trying to, we then realized that there's a space for on regional online streaming.
Right.
And Amazon and the Netflix were the only leaders. So we kind of started off with that. And then we did a pivot to review, because we saw this is a gap, and for OTT, it requires a lot of financial muscle. And for a startup, it was hard, very tough raising that kind of funds.
Yeah, and I'm saying even in this, the Rotten Tomatoes and all of those have come into some, or there's IMDb, which kind of gives you a whole range of everything. They've committed from a cast. The saying Rotten Tomatoes tries to commit it from the professional reviewers and the actual reviewers which are there. So, but I see that's interesting, because OTT, I think when you're looking for, especially from the smaller ones, that breakout film in India, The Great Indian Kitchen, started actually on a very small OTT platform, and then because of word of mouth, it kind of took off.
Yeah, and the thing is, even now, there is no space for the smaller films in the OTT ecosystem. Even today, I can vouch for that. I have friends or associates who have great scripts, but they're not getting their space in this.
Yeah.
And what we envision is, if there's a movie, if they could release it on anywhere, it could be on any platform, and our reviews can make a substantial difference, and they can make money as well as get the name and fame. I think we are success. We definitely, that's how we measure our KPI.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose you'll find those routes at some point from where you are. Yeah, so your entry has been through reviews, and then you'll try and figure your way from there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kiran.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Srikanth, you want to go?
Hi, Raghu. Anand this side.
Hi.
I'll take it.
Hi.
Anand, yeah, go ahead, Anand.
Yeah, hi, Vinu. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too. So,
Yeah.
Ala Mobility is a multimodal electric mobility platform. So,
Right.
we do rentals, rides, shares, deliveries, and network of charging stations on our platform.
Okay.
So, for now, our target audience is, we are mostly concentrating on B2B.
Yeah.
So, our target audience is the delivery companies or the 3PL vendors who are looking for an affordable solution to move their goods to the last mile.
Okay.
Yeah, and we are also starting a B2C pilot with the OYO rooms, in OYO rooms as in. So this will be a pickup from point A and drop at point A. So pick up from OYO and drop at OYO. So
Okay.
for this, our target audience is the people who are traveling in the city, and we give them an affordable way to commute in the city.
Okay, these are scooters or is it bikes? What exactly are the
We have
modes of?
5 models. Mostly they are scooters. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the other point is that it allows B2B platforms, which, let's say, Zomato or Swiggy or something, to look at hiring people who may not own a vehicle.
Correct.
And then say that, okay, this is something you can use in the interim. But
Yes.
I've also been reading this thing about, one is that in the US or in the places in China where these things started off, the problem seems to be that they're focused or concentrated around certain areas and not evenly spread. Or the way of finding it is, for the people who just want to use it for about, who do you think are your core users? What exactly? The OYO part of it, I think it obviously tells you it's an out of town user, and if they want some kind of mobility around the place, then
Correct.
it makes sense for them to come to you.
Yeah, so within the city, like anybody who's renting an IC engine vehicle, he spends about 4,000 rupees just for the rentals itself, and the fuel cost is additional to that.
Okay.
We, on the other hand, what we provide is the scooter for 4,000 rupees, and the charging cost is just 10 or 15 rupees for the 100 kilometers that the full charge gives them.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is mostly the delivery boys. For now, at least, yeah.
So then, as far as it's largely a B2B product right now. So where do you see this going in B2C? It is again going to be out of towners who come in and then want. So are you looking at smaller destinations, let's say like Pondicherry or something, where it's a small place? So mobility, or Goa, which is Goa is really big, but in terms of where people want to go, how exactly are you looking at getting customers within these for the B2C?
Yeah, so for now we have started with Oyo because it is, as a startup, it's difficult for us to manage so many say
Multiple
parking stations or
yeah.
charging stations.
Yeah,
It becomes beyond our control at this stage. But slowly, when we keep adding different stations to this network, then we expect people to, I mean, then our target customers will be somebody who'll just be traveling to his office from his home and drop it at the nearest station to his office. So this won't be pick up from anywhere and drop anywhere. Our service is station based. So until we increase the number of stations, we want to do with OYOs, like to start with.
No, just as an aside, this came up during the apartment complex where I live in. The person managing it was asking me that now you have all these, people are buying cars and they've started buying two-wheelers. The problem is, how do we provide these charging stations within the complex, because they've not been designed for this at all. So, a whole lot of petrol stations is one thing. I go outside, I fill petrol, I come back in, I have that parking space. But if you have to provide charging stations within apartment complexes, it's one of those things which is likely to be a problem that grows in terms of how to deal with it over the next couple of years, I think.
Yeah, so for that, like our answer is, you don't have to just access the electric vehicle. Don't buy it and don't charge it in your apartment, but something which is nearer to your apartment, a la station, you can go there, pick up a scooter, pay for it, use it for the whole day. You get a charge scooter and then drop it back to any other net of stations.
Yeah, so your charging stations are placed strategically at points wherever the pickup and drops are.
Yeah, so our charging stations will be at a place where the bikes will be parked as well. So you pick up from that station, and somebody who looks after the charging or swapping. Like it's not always charging or it's not always battery swapping. Like according to the whatever things are available, it will be like that. It won't be stuck on either the swapping or the charging, but it will have a provision for charging as well. The stations.
Yeah, it's a tough business because it looks the same, because it's like, I've been following this company, this Israeli company onto which a lot of money had been put in the early days, called A Better Place. And they looked at battery swapping as one of the, but getting every single lever moving, the customer angle, the infrastructure, the source of the power, how do you protect all the properties that you're renting out? Massive issues of everything to be handled. It's not a simple, and trying to figure out exactly what works within that whole thing. What is it that people are, so are you finding some kind of a pattern as to how people are using it, or
the pattern as in it saves you money,
right?
Yeah,
that is clear. That see, the part about it saving money is clear. My question is really as to, there is an outside circle. Let's say if we were to divide 3 concentric circles, which is good to have, and then there is a core, which is like, okay, I find it's essential. So if you were to find that kind of a use case, then it becomes, for the, I think, delivery companies, they're strapped for expanding their workforce, because they're obviously running up against people who don't have vehicles. So it makes sense for them to come to you and then do this. But in a consumer relationship, I mean, in a consumer use case, I'm still trying to figure out what are the places where this out of town, yes, that definitely makes sense. But then where does it go from there is the question.
So yeah, our target audience again is the people who have been using like Vogo, who are the users of Vogos of the world and Bounce of the world or Bounce of India. So these people who are already a target to the companies like Vogo or Bounce, they would use a cheaper alternative to what they were already using.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there is a market
familiar
for
with
this. We believe that there is a market for this.
Okay.
In the B2C space as well.
Right. Okay, great. I think that really gives me a good feel of. Thank you very much, Srikanth.
Thank you.
Right. I think we've covered all the 4 startups
Yes.
that submitted the responses. If
Yeah.
anybody has any other questions, or Venu, you want to call it a day? Patram or Sanket, do you have any questions?
All good from my side. It was really good session.
Yeah, I do have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, since we are trying to disrupt an existing industry, what should be our strategy in terms of branding?
Okay, Kiran, my answer to that would be that it has to come from the customers who are adopting the service and where you see value. In most cases, when you start off, like you said, you pivoted already from the distribution point to something where you think that, so is there a way of monetizing the reviews? Now, what I've seen with the reviewers on YouTube, for example, if you were to create a core group of reviewers who are very good at this and who begin to create, but the problem again is that as they get good, they want to become independent and they want to start off their own set of, so this is the question is, how do you provide value to an industry? So who exactly, how would you define your customers?
It's a B2B and a B2C for sure.
B2B, who's the person who you think will pay for the product or the service that you're providing?
Yeah, so the production houses and the OTT platforms.
They would want, the word to get out. So if you can promise them, for example, 1,000 reviews of the OTT film that comes out,
yeah,
then that becomes something, as far as they're concerned, it helps to get the word out.
Yeah.
So a company in its early stages would say, so if you get a group of people, if you have a large panel of reviewers, I mean, I'm just looking at it as to whether you already have a panel or you've thought along those lines. Because once you get this, suppose you attract a group of people who are very passionate about film, who want to express their opinion and who are looking to monetize some aspect of it. So even if they get a small, amount of money for putting out the review out there for anything that is new. And the attraction is that they get first views of whatever is coming out,
Okay. Yeah, so we don't have cash as benefits, but we have movie tickets.
Right. So those,
VIP
I think,
passes.
Yeah. So I think it would start with, if you think that reviewers as a group can really be expanded and the producers and OTT platforms would look for that, then they promote it on their own YouTube channels, then that becomes a potential, way to grow.
Yeah.
So you can offer them at least a certain number of reviews up every day as soon as the film is released, or as a discussion or a point of the thing, which will help to grow that whole channel.
True. So yeah, my question is like, right now, from a branding perspective, obviously, you have IMDb's, Rotten Tomatoes, Letterboxd, Let's OTT, etc.
Yeah.
So now we know that we have some innovative products in line. We are definitely going to disrupt it. So my question is, like, right now our way into the market is mobility movie review app right now.
Okay.
But after your session, I've started to think, how can that slogan change or my caption change and be different? So for example, like fog, they said fog chal raha hai, right? Yeah. So it started, I started thinking.
Yeah. And that is really the point. So you see what gets traction, what seems to get, the way I see it, producers, so you integrate, you meet at the point of where the producers and the OTT channels are trying to get traction for their products. So I remember seeing the MX channel 5 years, 6 years ago as billboards right across Bombay. So that's the point at which this became, at that point, OTT was just coming into, Netflix had still not come into India. So
Okay.
MX has now got over 1 billion downloads.
Yeah.
So they say that they are so what is it that, I think the review is one aspect of it, Kiran. I think in terms of how does that review impact the film or where does it add value is where you'll have to pitch this as a brand. So how does it make sense for a person to become a reviewer, and how does it help the OTT or the production house to ride on what you're offering?
Got it. Okay, cool.
I think
you.
that's the point at which the intersection happens.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank
thanks
you,
to
Raghu.
everyone who dropped off, and thank you
Yeah,
to
thanks to
everyone who's
everyone.
still here.
We're down to the people who originally started off the whole thing. But
Yes.
typically,
No,
what kind of?
I think they misunderstood it as a Q&A rather than more of a case analysis kind of thing. Anyways,
Doesn't matter. I mean, I'm saying as far as they're concerned, it's entirely up to, maybe I didn't communicate it well enough as to what they wanted to.
no problem.
You would have
But
got it.
yeah, it was really a great session, and thank you so much for taking out time, and the examples were awesome, and yes, and second hour where you got to talk to a few of the startup founders and tell them how to take it forward was also insightful.
I'm saying those are going to be the points at which I really hope that because trying to get a sense of where the brand is going is also something that each of these founders wrestle with, and that happens all the time. It's not as if even in a journey you figure out straight away as to where this thing should be. The constantly changing target.
All right. So we'll
Thank
be
you.
rolling out a
Thank you very
feedback
much.
link, and we'll be collecting some feedback, and we'll share that with you.
Done.
So thank you so much once again, and wish you a good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Raghu,
Thanks.
and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Good night. Bye bye.
Good night. Thank you.